I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack.
We interrupt our program to bring you a special broadcast. The German news agency Transocean said today in a broadcast that the Allied invasion had begun. I repeat, the German news agency Transocean said today in a broadcast that the Allied invasion had begun. There was no Allied confirmation.
Glorious hour. I only wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to witness this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Congress passes the most sweeping civil rights bill ever to be written into the law, and thus reaffirms the conception of equality for all men that began with Lincoln and the Civil War 100 years ago.
Gutted shells of buildings, flames raging out of control, and an atmosphere of apprehension still hover over the quieting Watts section of Los Angeles. Here for successive days and nights, mostly in the nights, the long hot summer had erupted into violence.
The Mandelbaum Gate between Israeli and Arab Jerusalem. It became an arbitrary barrier when Israel forced the world to acknowledge her existence nearly 20 years ago. But now, a triumphant Israeli army had smashed the barrier.
It may be small, but it's mighty significant, because apart from Rhodesia, Swaziland is the last British territory in Africa to obtain independence.
To tonight's headlines, Israel, mourning its dead and angered at the killers, prepares to hold a state funeral tomorrow for the 11 Olympic team members slain in West Germany. The Olympic Games are resumed after memorial services attended by 80,000 persons are held in Munich.
Good evening. The Middle East War produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year.
The preceding were some Morris matters of the past. Now join us in the den of discussion to listen to and talk about Morris matters occurring currently and anticipate those that will affect us in the future. Let's make history together. This broadcast is hosted by an independent thinker and speaker who will show you why Morris matters should matter to you.
Next up, I'm very interested to know about this organization. We have Peter Gerard from Climate Central. Peter, let's talk a little bit about who you are, what your title is, and I'm very interested about Climate Central because I've gone to the website and I'm still not clear as to what the organization does and is trying to accomplish. So please explain.
Well, hopefully I can help with that. I'm Peter Gerard. I'm the Vice President of Communications for Climate Central. And Climate Central is an organization of researchers. We conduct primary research and secondary analysis, essentially to make climate science accessible to audiences. And we work primarily through trusted messengers, and to us, that mostly means the media. So when you're on our website looking at the materials we've got, it's meant to be accessible to end users, to just anyone in the public, but it's meant in particular to help people who are explaining climate science, everything from weather to how it's affecting our regular lives, to audiences watching the news.
How big an organization is it?
We've got about 40 of us, so relatively small.
Well, that's quite large, though, when you talk about this subject. I think you're best known really for your graphics, though.
Good. I love hearing that. We work with, essentially, news organizations all around the U.S. We produce graphics for every media market in the country every week on some dimension of climate science. So I love that you've seen them.
Is it fair to say, in some respects, you're an aggregator?
Probably not. Although the data that we use to produce our analyses, of course, don't come from us. They tend to come from NOAA, National Weather Service, NASA. But in terms of the material we produce, it's original and comes only from Climate Central's science team. Most of us are scientists working within the organization, so our science team is by far the largest contributor.
No, but what I'm thinking about is, for example, we're going to get to this report that you put out, I believe it was April 2nd, but you cite a lot of information. You got it from EIA, a well-known energy association. And what you did, though, is put it in more of a bite size and more comprehensive form because you used a lot of graphics. That's sort of where I'm going.
Absolutely. In that case, you've got it right. We're using federal data and we're trying to visualize it and make it tell a story, essentially, about the growth of wind and solar electricity in the U.S.
Have you had any media contacts or partners with any TV stations or radio stations in the Utica Rome market? Would you know?
I'd need to check specifically, but almost certainly. I know that we have worked with close to 100% of all media markets in the U.S. in some capacity. So I'd need to go back and check on names, but there is nearly a 100% chance that you've seen work of ours featured locally.
Well, the reason I ask is because I'm sure you've run into this, although looking over your information, you certainly have a lot of on-air meteorologists which you deal with. But I used to, before I did this program, I did from 2011 to 2015, I did a program that was environmentally focused on a local public radio station. And at that time, my background is atmospheric science, so I know a little bit about, weather broadcasting. And at that time, I tried to get some of the people that were on the TV stations to talk about climate change. And that was like the third rail for broadcasters, if you know where I'm going.
I know exactly where you're coming from. And it's something we're asked about a lot. I think I've got, in a sense, good news, which is we're really seeing a remarkable shift in the media. It really over the last, probably over the last 10 years, but especially in the last 5.
Well, I haven't seen it here, but, hope springs eternal, I guess. As a matter of fact, that's 2 reasons I started the program back up under a different name, of course. But one is I have a decreased workload because I'm semi-retired. I guess that just means I'm tired now. But the other thing is still very unsatisfied with talk shows and how they talk about energy and the environment, and just a lot of misinformation out there. So, I'll have to crank it up again. And, last time we got people from IPCC on, and we had a Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Alley, talk, and so on and so forth, just to try to educate people, if they have an open mind. You can't really reach a closed mind, but we're going to do the best we can. But let's go to, what are the greatest obstacles to continued growth of wind and solar? Because you released a report on April 2nd, talking about the tremendous growth of wind and solar in this country.
And we're really seeing it, and it's this great positive story. But you're absolutely right to point out, both with media and with this, that there is an awful long way to go before it fulfills the promise that we need it to, if we're going to reach a point in the U.S. where our power generation is at net zero, is carbon neutral. And there are a number of obstacles. I mean, it takes a long time, even for what you think of as facilities using, technology that's familiar and commonplace, to actually come online. You're seeing that with offshore wind. You're seeing a relatively slow development of transmission, and that's for both wind and solar from places that have a lot of wind and a lot of sun, and enable these large industrial scale installations to actually deliver power to where it's used. And so the biggest choke points in a couple of these areas are those, you'd really think of them as infrastructural blockages.
Yeah, to make your point, it's fortuitous that we have you on now, because a couple of days ago, the New York State Controller says that the process is still too slow, and there's at least 50 projects in the queue, and it takes way too many years to get these projects on board, despite the CLCPA and the RAPID Act. So we're really facing a problem here in that we have the projects, but we may lose the projects because of our largesse.
It's a really common source of frustration. And you hear about ways in which some of these roadblocks can be removed, but right now the reality is the pace at which we're bringing on both wind and solar capacity, it could be higher than it is.
Let's talk about that a minute, about how fast we're bringing on these renewables. And it seems to me, I was gleaning through some of the material from the report. This is very interesting. It says that in the U.S., both capacity and produced power on the solar side, it grew 8 times from 2014 to 2023. And for wind, we doubled. Kind of amazing totals.
If you think about it in that context, I mean, that's what I was referring to. It's really encouraging. You're seeing wind and solar together contribute something like 15% of the electricity that we need in the US. And that's up from not many years ago, a relatively fractional amount.
Yeah. And also, it's interesting that both solar and wind have surpassed hydro, which of course most people are aware of in New York State. It is a very big contributor to our renewables here in the state.
Absolutely. One of the things that we pointed out to people, and a few were sort of surprised and encouraged by, combined wind and solar, or at least combined renewables, and that includes hydro, I think, outproduce nuclear in the United States.
Yeah. Well, that leads me into my other question, because I was a little confused with this. I think I understand where the EIA is going. What's the acronym for that? It escapes me right now. Obviously, the E is energy, and is the I international?
Information administration.
Oh, information administration.
Yep.
Okay. There's so many acronyms. I need a scoreboard to keep track.
I won't know them all. Honestly, it's one of the hazards here.
In this report, they say something interesting, or you report that they say solar and wind energy will lead growth in the United States power generation for at least the next 2 years. Now, I can interpret that one of two ways, and I'm hoping it's the good way. In other words, 2 years because that's all they can report, or do they see something else on the horizon, which I don't think there is. So which way do we take that?
No, I don't think it's the dark version where they're expecting significant sort of coal or other types of energy production to come online and jump past. I believe, and this is where my knowledge may be on the sketchy side, but EIA is using essentially the approved permits in the pipeline as a way to identify what those growth projections look like. And so they're limited by essentially, the applications and progress on them.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, because people, still hang their hat on nuclear, and now the latest iteration is hydrogen. I used to be high on hydrogen. I used to be high on small modular reactors, SMRs. But really, what's happened is too costly, take too long. I mean, NuScale on the nuclear side has just gone kaput. And I don't see hydrogen making any real significant impacts unless it's in other areas, maybe like agriculture, or in maybe niche markets like heavy industry and maybe some long haul trucking. So that's why I was asking, because I don't really see anything else replacing renewables on the horizon.
Exactly. Not soon enough, not big enough. Meanwhile, you've got wind and solar, which are developing quickly, coming online relatively quickly, and you've got battery technology that's making storing some of what they're producing more efficient. It ends up providing the cheapest source of electricity that we can buy right now. And we've done reports on nuclear as part of, in theory, a low carbon potential route for our energy mix. And what you said was something that we were able to highlight in the report. The expense is one of the considerably high, if not insurmountable, awfully close to adding more nuclear capacity to the existing fleet.
Yeah, well, even Mr. Hansen, Professor Hansen, who I consider the godfather of sort of climate change since his report to Congress in the 80s, even admits that we should have some nuclear energy. For example, we're kind of blessed to have that addition of nuclear power here in New York State, but it shouldn't be a significant part going further. So I want to really stress too, you mentioned this, and I'll amplify in your remarks, it's amazing what's happening in battery technology. Can you explain a little bit to people exactly what's going on there? And that's why we say that really renewables will take over, because in part, the battery technology is such that, I mean, we're talking even, there's iron air batteries, which are supposedly will give you 100 hours of power. So it's just amazing what's happening.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I can answer the question only at the really highest level, because it's that technology is not something that we've really developed reports on, except for its capacity to, really extend what's happening right now with renewables, particularly in wind and solar. And you're seeing a technology in its infancy. It was not long ago that battery storage was not a significant part of the solution to one of the biggest problems with renewables, which of course is what do you do in the interim between high periods of productivity, right? What do you do when it's not windy out? What do you do when it's night? And there, until somewhat recently, was not a meaningful response to, being able to store the energy locally and distribute it through existing means. As that capacity builds up, as you're able to store the power that you generate from the sun during the day, keep it at night and distribute it through your grid in, in a metered way throughout the day and into places where there are peak demands, that can remarkably change the efficiency of the whole system.
Well, another thing that's interesting to me is the proof is in the pudding, because when you look at some of these statistics in this report, it's really a red state bonanza that's occurring with renewables. For example, I'll give you just a couple of things that I've gleaned from the report. Iowa and South Dakota, both red states, wind is more than 1/2 the current electric mix. As a matter of fact, in Iowa in 2023, it's 60%. and in South Dakota, it's about 55%, and Texas generates 3 times more than any other state, all red states.
That's right. I mean, to some extent, that's where the wind is. And it's funny, we've gotten questions about Texas, and there are people who are surprised by it until you think about Texas's, experience in energy, where you've got a talented workforce and you've got an economy that has always understood the production and transportation and monetization of electricity. You've got an industry that's really well positioned to take advantage of its natural resources. Texas is an absolute unqualified leader in wind and solar energy production in the US, and will probably grow.
And not only that, but these red states are really going to, I think, probably more than blue states, as I see it, at least so far, as to money doled out from the IRA. They're going to really benefit from that, something the Biden administration got accomplished.
I think that's probably right. And again, some of it is just the, natural locations and resources and land availability that makes that possible. But, this is a whole of the US solution. And, anything that can bring, new areas of the country and the economy into this effort, not just to produce electricity and generate economic boon, but to help us decarbonize, it's welcome and an important part of what really end up being lofty goals. Net zero is a remarkably ambitious goal for the US. And, frankly, wherever you see contribution to the effort to electrify our power generation system, it's all welcome.
Well, with all this good news, I have to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer here, because I note also that I've known this, of course, before the report, unfortunately, but the report also brings this home. With all the good news that we've just described about renewables and solar and wind, the bad news is that the U.S. is still not on track to meet climate change goals from the Paris COP.
It's the story everywhere you look. We're not doing enough. We're not acting fast enough. And it's a collective we. I know people tend to sort of take it on board personally and wonder what they can do, but the biggest opportunities to make progress, they're at the biggest levels, right? These are corporations and industries and governments. And as great as it is to see the investment that the United States has made, that other countries have made in decarbonization, you point out a truth that's inescapable. We're not moving fast enough.
Yeah, and I have to end with that, because all this good news, I don't want people to get the wrong impression of where we are and where we need to go. And I think I agree with your point. So with that agreement, let's give your website and let people know where they can get all your good information.
Absolutely. We're at climatecentral.org, and you can find information about local sea level rise projections going into the future. You can find information globally about how climate is impacting weather on a daily basis anywhere. And you can find all this information about the solar and wind power that the US is producing and what that means for climate change globally.
Well, Peter Gerard, we very much appreciate your time from Climate Central, and I hope I can work with your organization in the future.
We'd be happy to. Richard, thank you for having me today.
Come on up here. Ah, that's better. I'm glad you dropped by. I've got a little story I think you'll like. It's about a four-legged friend of mine. No, I don't mean copperback there. This happened a while back in the beautiful Capitan Mountain country of New Mexico, on the Lincoln National Forest. It's It was daytime on the Capitan, dry and hot, but still nice and peaceful. All the animals in the forest were having a grand old time in the sunshine of spring. There was one little 3-month-old fellow in particular who didn't have a care in the world. He was spending his time having fun, a-growling and a-prowling and a-scratching. That's right. That bear cub didn't have a care in the world. And somebody, a 2-legged somebody, got careless. It took several hundred men 5 days to lick that fire. 17,000 acres of timber were destroyed. Timber that could have been used for homes and furniture, along with the mills that could have turned it out. A lot of wild animals lost their homes. Many lost their lives. But there was one little fellow who somehow survived that terrible fire. Yes, the little bear cub came through. He was found clinging to what was left of a small tree. New Mexico game warden Ray Bell rushed that burned and frightened cub to the nearest animal hospital by plane. Warden Bell saw to it that he was given the best of care. His burned feet responded to treatment. His hair grew back, and with his little belly full of good food, he grew fat and sassy. They named him Little Smokey, and in a special Piper Cub plane took him on another trip by air. This time it was clear across the country, over America's farms, factories, and cities. Finally, Little Smokey and his plane landed in Washington, our nation's capital. Here, along with his official escort, New Mexico's Assistant State Game Warden, Homer C. Pickens, Little Smokey was greeted in the rain by a very enthusiastic committee. Chief Forester Lyle Watts accepted Little Smokey as a gift to the state foresters and Uncle Sam's Forest Service from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. But for our little hero, that welcome in the rain was only the beginning of a new and very worthwhile life. On the first sunny day, Little Smokey was presented to the National Zoo in Washington and became a living symbol of forest fire prevention. The kids went for the whole idea like a bear goes for honey. And Little Smokey seemed to like the new setup too. It was really a big occasion. Senator Chavez of New Mexico was there to welcome his former constituent. constituents to his home in the zoo. The state foresters joined in dedicating the life of little Smokey to the school children of America to serve as an honest-to-goodness reminder of the danger of forest fires and the need to save our forests and wildlife from destruction by fire. You're probably wondering if little Smokey has lived up to all the fine things that were planned for him. You can take my word for it, he has. You see, I had a personal invitation to visit little Smokey a while back. Of course, he's kind of a big Smokey now. A year or so will do that to a bear. I was mighty glad to see him, and I soon learned that I wasn't the only one. That Smokey is a famous character, all right. He sure liked the oranges I brought him, but I'd do that for any forest fire preventing pal. I hate forest fires worse than all the diamondback rattlesnakes in the world. That's why I've tried to do my little bit toward preventing them. I guess that's why the forestry boys were on hand too, and why they gave me a special certificate making me an honorary forest ranger. That really made me proud because it put me right on Smokey's team. Of course, Smokey had to check the document to see if it was genuine and scratch his seal of approval on it. On that trip, I learned just how much good Smokey has done in preventing man-caused forest fires, mostly as a model for those car cards and posters you see most everywhere. Smokey and his important message sure get around. On nail trucks along the city streets, in the buses and trolley cars, in the woods, why, even in the comics. And now there's a song about Smokey that school children all over this great country of ours can sing and take to heart.
With the ranger got a shovel and a pair of tumbleweeds, you will find him in the forest, always nipping at the leaf. People stop and pay attention when he tells you beware, but everybody knows that he's a party dancing there. Smokey the Bear, crawling in the down and the sniffing the air. He can find the fire before it starts to flame, and why they call him Smokey, that was how he got his name. If you ever see the forest when the fire's running wild, and you love the things within it like a mother loves the sky, then you know what Smokey tells you when you see you passing through. Remember, please be careful, it's the least that you can do. Smokey the Bear, crawling and the growling and the sniffing the air. He can find a fire before it starts to flame. That's why they call him Smokey, that was how he got his name.
Smokey the Bear, a living reminder to all of us today of the need to protect our forests and wildlife for the good of all those who follow us in the future. Well, that's the story of Smokey Bear, your friend and mine. But Smokey needs our help, so let's all be careful of fires in the forest always. And remember, Only we, you and I, can prevent forest fires. So long for now, partners.
That's the end of this episode of Morris Matters. Join us for another episode filled with interesting and informative guests and topics. In between podcasts, you can keep up with important news by going to morrismatters.com. Feel free to react to our website or podcast by sending an email to denofdiscussion@gmail.com.